Hello, Internet friends. Welcome back. Once again, thank you for joining. Today, I want to talk about limitations, and I want to talk about risk versus reward. I want to talk about a lot of different things. Most of them have to do specifically with trying to get stronger, but I hope that you can take some of the ideas, if that's not what you're interested in, and apply them to other parts of your life, whatever your pursuit, whatever your passion may be. So, first off, I do want to make a little bit of a clarification and sort of just cover my bases here and explain, for anybody that may not know it, most things that we do have some sort of inherent risk. It's definitely the inherent risk of failure, and anytime that you're doing something, anytime you're trying to grow in some area, it usually requires some sort of overloading principle, or you're adapting to a situation that you are not currently able to handle 100%. You have to put yourself in some sort of an environment where growth is required that forces you to get better at something so that you can adapt, grow, and continue to progress. And you could be doing everything right, but there is an inherent risk where sometimes, especially in something like powerlifting or weightlifting in general, or strongman or CrossFit or anything, you could be doing everything perfectly correct, and some fluke or freak occurrence happens, and you just end up injured, and that's it. You did everything right, but something popped in the wrong spot, you heard a noise, and you're out for weeks, months, years, however long it takes. And that is something that we accept going in. So the biggest thing to take away from that is nothing is 100% safe if you're trying to push yourself to grow in that. There's a little bit, at least. The best we can do is minimize the inherent risk by doing things correctly and taking adequate care of ourselves and putting ourselves in the best situation possible to avoid those things, while still understanding that something could happen, and that's the expectation that everybody needs to have when they start this. Even if you're doing everything right, something could go wrong, and if you still want to do it, awesome. Then maybe it's something that you're really passionate about and it's worth it to you to take that risk. Now, moving from that, with that understanding, I want to talk about how necessary it is to push your limitations and to not set arbitrary limitations on yourself. There's a lot of people who go through life and will point to something and say, well, that's not possible. Or they'll point to something more commonly that someone else has done and said, well, they're doing something that I think is impossible for me, or that shouldn't be possible, and they are some exception to a rule. And that's, a lot of times in weightlifting, it comes down to the genetic case, which I'm not going to stand here and say that genetics don't play a role in strength training. I'm not going to say that people that are genetically gifted don't have an inherent advantage, but the one thing we can control is our ability to work as hard as we possibly can and continue to move towards some idealized version of ourselves. That is not restricted by your genetic limitations. Your drive to improve yourself and find out your limits is much that just exists with every single person. And so try not to place limitations on yourself initially. If there's a time and a place to really seek them out, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit when it comes to progressions with programming. Testing your limits, maybe at the beginning of a training cycle, maybe is not the best time to do it. You say, okay, week 1 of my intro phase, I'm going to AMRAP every set and see what I can do. I'm going to try to hit it. I'm going to try to go to failure every single time. And it just ends up being too much, where you're putting yourself again in that unnecessary risk kind of ratio. You're kind of way far away from here, where the reward is not going to be all that great, because you're going to burn yourself out by going that hard every single time. So it's important to approach these things with some sort of real plan, some sort of coordinated response, I guess, to how you're going to react to some of these things. In this case that you're watching right now, this workout, not a fun time for me. I hate sevens. I've talked about it before. Anything over 3 reps always feels like cardio, and it's definitely outside my comfort zone. If Eric and Hanny hadn't specifically assigned sets of 7, I probably wouldn't be doing more than the first set here. And it's one of those things where I trust that this is the appropriate time in the programming, in the structure of the overall plan, that for me to continue, I need to put myself in an uncomfortable situation and try to stay as safe as I can, but push the limits of what I would see myself being able to do. 6 weeks ago, I wasn't looking at this weight and saying, yeah, 480 for sets of 7, cakewalk, should be no problem at all. And while it was a challenge in this, and you're going to see, that was my 4th set right there, and I left this in there because I think that there, especially in social media, you only really see people's high points nowadays. And it's crazy how quickly, if I would have shut the camera off a few seconds earlier, you might have said, yeah, it looked a little tough, but it wasn't all that bad. I'm catching my breath like an old fat person here for what felt like about 20 minutes, where I couldn't even go and walk over to my desk to sit down and take off my gear. I just needed to get it off of me because I had pushed myself so far out of my own comfort zone. And you wouldn't see that otherwise. You wouldn't see that in some snapshot of someone else's life. And so if you're putting your own expectations of what is possible in your own reality based off of what you're seeing someone else do, recognize that you can't really use those as limitations for yourself. You can't use someone else's setup, what that little glimpse, that snapshot of that person's life, as your standard of limitation, because you don't know how much it's taking out of them to even do that. It's really difficult, and that's one of the reasons I left that in there, is to show that, yeah, the reps themselves didn't look all that bad, but it totally wrecked me after every single set. I felt like that. And so it's important to keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out your own limitations. And so the important thing, there's a lot of important things, or at least I feel like they're important about this, is that you can't really determine your limitations until you give yourself the opportunity to kind of test them and to kind of see where they're at. Now, like I mentioned, you don't want to do that every single time. You want to give yourself appropriate times and opportunities to where it's the best idea to test those limitations. But if every single time you go to the gym, or every single time you go into a situation where you're trying to build the skill that you're passionate about and trying to improve at, you're going to burn out. You can't maintain testing your limitations every single time. We need periods of time that are a little bit more relaxed. So the never deload crew, the people who say like, oh, I'm just gonna go till failure every single time, that's not gonna last very long. You have to have an approach. You have to respect the pursuit. You have to respect whatever it is you're passionate about enough to learn enough about it to move forward in at least a semi-well-informed way. I mean, if you're working hard and you have a solid plan that isn't just filled with terrible ideas, chances are that you're going to progress better than if you just do one or the other. You can have an optimal program, but you're not putting any effort into it, and so you're not going to get better. You can have all the effort in the world, but there's the plan is not well implemented because it hasn't been well thought out. And neither of those are going to give you the same kind of benefit as taking the time to learn what you're doing, putting real thought and attention and effort into improving at the process, working as hard as you can within the context of that process, being disciplined so that at the times when you're supposed to just do the work and be done, you're doing that and not going overboard and getting sucked into this sense of, well, I just have to work more every single time and kind of screw yourself up later. And you also have to understand that there's going to be parts of the programming, there's going to be parts of that journey or of the pursuit that you're in where it becomes appropriate to put yourself in a situation that is really uncomfortable and push closer to those limitations. Because if you don't ever push to them, if you always are playing it safe, you'll never know how far you can go, and then you are the limiting factor. Your ability to work hard doesn't get developed, and you never develop the skill of overcoming an obstacle if you're never able to push yourself past what you think your limitations might be. In the same frame, you have to be able to say it's not always the right time to do that. If you're maxing out in the gym and you're having terrible meets every single time, uh, where you just feel like you're beat down and beat up, maybe the problem is that your priority structure is messed up and you need to learn a little bit more about how to be disciplined and not always have your foot on the gas to where you run out right before you need it. So that's kind of the ideas that I wanted to talk about today. Uh, I know it's a lot of it has to do specifically with lifting heavy things, but I have a feeling that most of you are here to hear about that kind of stuff on my channel. But if that's not really your dig and you really want to improve at other areas, I still think a lot of the same principles apply. Just because you work hard at something doesn't guarantee you the right to succeed at it. We can all have everything going right and still have some fluke accident happen. At the same time, if you really care about something and you want to get better at it, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to the passion and the pursuit that you have to learn as much as you can. Always keep learning, always keep growing, both physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever area you have the opportunity to get better at. That is the place where you can work on that and get focused. Don't get sucked into someone else's reality, of someone else's dream, and the little snapshot you're seeing of their life. A lot of the time, you're seeing what they want you to see, and you're not seeing the struggle that's behind it. But anybody who is getting to a high level definitely has to work to get there. And if they don't have to work to get there, then there's probably something else in their life that they're struggling at that maybe you have an edge on. So we all have different gifts. We all have different skills. The one thing that you have in your control is your ability to work hard towards the goals that you have. And I think that if you care about something, you definitely owe it to yourself to give your best effort every single time. Thank you guys for sticking around this long. If you're still here, I hope that this was helpful to you or informative in some way, and I will talk to you all very soon. Have a great night. Bye.